It is, it is going to be great. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Appreciate that you're all taking the time, um, uh, um, especially that at that time of the night, as um, what he was saying. It's dinner time, so hopefully we're not depriving you from your dinner. But so I'm going to try to put my thing in presentation mode. Sorry about that. Um,
While you're sorting out presentation mode, for those
yeah.
in the chat, could you put your name, your location, and if you know your Indigenous country, put your Indigenous country, traditional owner, and introduce yourself to the rest of the people while we're going through. And that way, if you're asking questions of one another, you can kind of know the context by knowing the location. Over to you, Christophe.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to mention that we're a bit too many of us to do a presentation. So an introduction of everybody. So we'll just introduce ourselves through the chat. So that thing is definitely not working in presentation mode for me. So I'm sorry about that. I'll get there, don't worry. I'm usually a bit better than that with technology. Ah, that's much better. Okay.
We're all ears, Christophe.
Yeah. Okay. So this session tonight is basically designed for advisors who are, just ready to do your first carbon project registration. So you know a little bit of, the basic stuff about carbon. When you're just about to do your first carbon registration, you looked at the CER portal, and it looks a bit daunting, and I do understand that. So that's what we're going to cover. We're not going to cover. So if you are a landholder there in the audience, we're not going to cover everything that talks, for example, about whether you should do a project or what are the production related impacts on your farm about doing a project. We assume that you're just ready to do the registration. We're going to cover the registration process. So we're going to cover a few things outside of that as well, because you need to be ready to do a registration, and there's a few things you need to do beforehand, but we're going to mostly focus on the registration process itself. So if I'm too basic, because I don't know where you stand in terms of knowledge, but if I'm too basic for everybody, just say, hey, Christophe, move on, please. Same thing if I use acronyms that you don't know, stop me and just ask me. The reason being, you'll see that domain is absolutely incredibly full of acronyms, but tell me if you don't know, and I'll use them out of habit. So just tell me. I'll try not to, but if I do, please stop me. Interestingly, that topic about just registering a project is way too big to cover everything, right? So my intention is that you will direct basically what we're going to talk about. We can't cover everything. There's no way. My intention is to show you where the traps are and how you need to look for the answers you need. Ask the questions in real time or on the Miro board. We'll stop from time to time to check if there are any questions. And I'll tell you if the question is covered later so that we don't repeat it twice. But yeah, please ask the questions you want to know about, especially if you started already on a project and you have some burning questions. Let me know, and we can solve those. Share your expertise, because I'm sure there's a few people around. Well, I know there are a few people around who have started. Kim and Marcos, for example, who have started doing registration successfully in the case of Marcos. And there's nothing like a network of people collaborating. So please interact on me at the Mural board or in the chat, however you want, but share your expertise. As I said, it seems easy, but registering a CER project is really detailed. The legislation is mind-bogglingly complex and long. There is no way anyone can know it all. Even the CER, sometimes when you ask them questions, actually give you the wrong answer. So my main guidance is always check. Whatever you want, always check. Even when I say today, I might get it wrong. So always check even what is in this presentation. And you'll only ever know the legislation by checking. It's by going back and back again to the main documents that you'll begin to understand and to memorize some of it. So the answer to any question that you get about a project is let me check. I'll repeat that a few times because it's so important. Sorry about the presentation. There are very few pretty pictures. It's mostly boring bullet points. I didn't have the time to do a better one, so sorry about that. Next version they'll be better. The slides will be a little bit more pretty. And also feedback, please, during or after the presentation. Let me know how we can improve it, what questions I didn't cover, what didn't make sense, what was lacking. Love to know all that. Cool. Also, I've tried to keep the presentation content light so that we're relaxed about not meeting deadlines and we can explore a few things. So we can answer questions. What we're going to cover today, basic concepts, just to level everybody on the basics of an ACU scheme project. One slide about the devil is in the detail. I've said it and said it again. Check and always check. I'll give you a couple of examples of things in the legislation that there's no way you would have known that without double checking and triple checking. So a little bit on that. Before starting, what you need to do before starting registration. The reason is once you submit your project for registration, the CR will come back with question always. But there's a delay of about 2 to 3 weeks every time. So you want to minimize the number of questions that the CR will ask, because it can extend your application for quite some time, because there's 2 to 3 week delay every time, plus 1 week for you to find the answer, and it goes very quickly. That's a month. So 2 rounds like that, and you've lost 2 months. So you really want to do the best job you can before actually submitting your application. We'll talk about additionality and newness because they're part of eligibility, and they're quite strange concepts when you're not familiar to them. So the landowners that you're dealing with will inevitably scratch their head about additionality and newness. After all that, we're finally going to look at the registration process for a project. Yes, then we'll have a break around 7:45 maybe. After that, we'll talk about identity, because it's one of the trickiest things in the application process is identity and who is who. We'll have a list. We'll have a look at all the documents you need to prepare. There's not a lot of them for an application. And then a few tips and tricks. And then we'll talk about the practical exercise that I have in store for you. You'll see, because there's nothing like practice. So we'll talk about that at the end. Just before we jump into that, tomorrow's session is about full cam. You'll get the best of that session if you actually download full cam and have it ready on your laptop, so that we can interact around full cam. So we want the 20 years 2 and very soon 3 versions of full cam. We want the 2020 version of FullCam ready if you can before the session, tomorrow's session, right? What about the rest of the week? The rest of the week, so tomorrow's FullCam. Wednesday is about sampling for the soil carbon, because you don't have to, but more often than not, 99% of the time, you will want to do the sampling in parallel with your application. It didn't used to be the case, but since the 21 method, you can actually do your baseline sampling whilst your application is being assessed, which, sorry, saves a lot of time. So it's really part of the application process during the baseline sampling. So we'll do that on Wednesday. Thursday, we'll talk about the economics of an AccuScheme project. Why? Because as I said, you want to make sure that the land owner that you're submitting the project for is really completely across the financial, and you work that with them, and they're well aware of what's of why they're doing the project, including the financials. So it's important to be able to be completely fluent with the economics of an AccuScheme project, because they'll have a lot of questions. So that's what we have in store for the week. FullCam, Wednesday, soil sampling, Thursday, economics, and Friday, we'll come back with a few frequently asked questions from the landowners, and also we'll debrief the practical exercise. All right. What do you stop me if there's burning question which you think should be answered? Is there anything so far that I would need to look at? No, obviously not.
Nothing yet.
Cool.
Christophe, I was just checking Miro. Nobody's put a question up yet, so you're good to go.
Awesome. Now, basic concepts quickly. As you all know, method governs all AccuScheme projects. That's a basic piece of information that will drive your project. So it's the most important document that you need to know when trying to register a project, right? There's a number of methods. I can't remember the total number of methods for AccuScheme. There's quite a few. I think there's probably maybe about 50 of them. There's methods for waste, methods for transport, method for the energy industry. There's lots of methods. We only look at the agriculture and vegetation ones, and there's not many of those. But if you, as an advisor, you should be familiar with all the agriculture and vegetation ones. So my advice is to go on the CER website, look at all the methods and read the webpage summaries for all the vegetation and agricultural ones. The CER has done a much better job than they had in the past about explaining the methods. So for each method, there's a one-page summary, which you can, click on the little plus and then it expands a little bit, sections that actually are pretty good at explaining the method. Now, it does not replace the downloading and having at hand the actual text of the method itself, because we'll see the devil is in the detail. It's the actual eligibility requirements and reporting requirements and monitoring requirements are incredibly detailed, and the full detail is only in the method, and that's what you need to know before submitting a project. Right? So, but the summaries, just to have a glance and understand the method, are absolutely great. There's another great set of pages in the CER website, which they've put up very, very recently in the last couple of months. There's a link a bit further down in the presentation that explain not only the methods, but also the registration process, how to apply, etc., which are really, really well done. So have a look at those as well. The link is a bit later in the presentation. So the methods, all types of methods can be sequestration or emission avoidance. And when you're doing a project, be careful because the legal requirements are quite different. For sequestration or emission avoidance. Most vegetation and ag methods are sequestration projects. It's taking the carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it somewhere, basically in soil or trees. Now, first question on my part to see if you can manipulate the mirror board is, does anyone know? You can either put it in the boards or the chat or whatever you want. Does anyone know a emission avoidance method in agriculture?
Methane?
Which one? Sorry.
Methane avoidance. Is that a method?
Yeah. Do you have the exact name of the method by any chance? It's true. There's one. Do you know how it's called? Yes, it's called beef sequestration. The beef. Oh, sorry, mine went blank. I don't know the official name. Yes, it's a method that reduces the emission. Beef herd management. It's called beef herd management. It reduces your methane emission of your beef herd. There's another one which is savanna burning, where you reduce emissions. It's in vegetation. It's a vegetation method where you reduce the emissions of savanna burning by burning in the cool period as opposed to burning in the hot period. Now, you're unlikely to use either of those because savanna burning is restricted to is mostly used in northern Queensland. And for beef herd management, you need probably about 50,000 herds of cattle to make it work. So, it's not often that you find someone with 50,000 head of cattle. So. Most likely, you will only work on sequestration projects. Now, another quiz, and I'll buy a bottle of beer to anyone who can find before Friday in the legislation the section where it states that emission avoidance have a 0 permanence period. So there's no requirement to maintain carbon stock for emission avoidance, which makes sense because there's no carbon stock. You just have not emitted. But if you can find the precise section, I'll buy you a bottle of your favorite beer or wine before Friday. Good luck. But that's a flippant example. But sometimes when you're looking at a specific requirement for a project, that's what you're going to have to do. So try to find this one. At least you win something immediately. All the common basic concept of the CER project areas and CEAs, right? Carbon emission accounting areas. The reason I'll mention those two is that the one that we are going to be mostly concerned is the CEA, because that's where you account for your carbon, right? So that's the carbon sequestering area, which is the one where, the area of that matters, etc., etc. However, you need to know the two concepts, because most project at registration, you don't need to identify your CEAs. You only need to identify your project area, right? And then at a later stage, generally when you want to claim ACCUs, you define you carve out of your project area your CEA, right? So why define those two things? The rationale behind that from the CER is that you might want to reserve out of your property, a big area where you're going to plant trees, for example, and then you define smaller CEAs only when you want to plant trees. And the CER actually says that it's better to have your entire property defined as a project area at registration, and then you define your CEAs later. But you have to be really careful about that, because for some methods, the difference between the CEA and the project area, actually the emissions out of those areas which are not in the CEA actually counts as a negative to the carbon that you sequester into the CEAs, right? So for some methods, you've got to be really careful not to define your project area as too big. The other thing is that if you define your project area as too big, some methods are incompatible. They cannot overlap. For example, avoided clearing and soil carbon cannot overlap. So basically, if you submit an avoided clearing project with the project area being your entire property, then that's it. You cannot have another project run on that. So I usually tend to, so that's one of the things you have to be careful when you're registering the project, is exactly defining with the landholder what they want to do in the future, so that you define the project area big enough so that there's freedom to define new CEAs, but not too big, right? Another two concepts that are slightly confusing sometimes is the permanence period and the crediting period. The permanence period is the period for sequestration project during which you have to maintain the carbon stocks. So, for example, if you're planting trees or doing a soil carbon project, actually most sequestration projects have a permanence period of 25 years, right? Or 100 years. You have a choice, but minimum 25 years. So that's the period during which you have to maintain your carbon stock. Another concept is crediting period, which is a period during which you're receiving credits. And interestingly, they're not the same. So for some methods, for example, there aren't in vegetation in ag, you get credits for 7 years. So that's your crediting period, but you have a permanence period of 25 years. Similarly, if you choose a permanent period of 100 years, your crediting period is still 25 years. So you earn credit for 25, and then for the next 75, you have to maintain the carbon stocks, but you're not getting any credits from them. So be careful of making sure when you start the project to define clearly what permanence period you want and what your crediting period is going to be, right? And your crediting period is usually 25 years, but not always. For example, if you plant a CEA in a planting project later in the life of the project, the crediting period for that CEA starts when it's planted, but still stops 25 years after the beginning of the project. So your crediting period for a CEA planted later is smaller. So it's in your interest to plant them as quickly as you can, so to speak, right? Other things that might trip you: carbon versus carbon dioxide versus carbon dioxide equivalent. The most dangerous one there is FullCam, which talks in mass of carbon, not of carbon dioxide. So be careful when you have results from FullCam. Remember that the mass of carbon in the trees, not carbon dioxide. Just quick quiz to wake you up. How much, if you store 1 ton of carbon in a tree, how much carbon dioxide have you taken out of the atmosphere? Tick, tick, tick. Miro, chat, speak up. You've taken
3.67.
Yes. Well done. I don't know who that was. That was great.
Mel.
Thank you. Who was that?
Mel.
Well done. So it's 3.66666 actually, but yeah, 3.67. Cool.
Well done, Mel.
Hey, well done. 1 point. Interestingly, the mass of wood, and that's complete coincidence, is just about 4 times the mass of carbon in them, right? So if you store 1 ton of carbon in a tree, you've taken 3.67 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere, which equates about 3.6 tons of wood. as a pool of carbon in the wood. So interestingly, so if you say, oh yeah, that tree is about 1 ton, how many carbon is in there? Well, it's about the mass of the tree divided by 3.67. Complete coincidence, but it's rule of thumb that usually works. Methane and nitrous oxide, everybody's familiar with them. They're the two most potent greenhouse gases that we'll have to deal with in ag. They are respective. Oh, actually, they are respectively. Who knows the sequestration, the emission? Well, how much more methane is compared to how much more potent methane is compared to carbon dioxide? Anyone know? Same quiz. Nero, pick up. Hey.
Speak up, Phil. No point in putting fingers up.
4 times the amount, is it?
4 times? No.
I've heard people say 25 times, but I've also heard different numbers.
That's actually a good question. There's a big debate going on to whether it's 25 or 28. I think the latest official figure is 28. But a lot of people argue around that, whether it's 25 or 28. I think the latest official figure is 28. And nitrous oxide, do you know how much more potent nitrous oxide is?
260.
Tick, tick, tick. Hey?
260.
How much? 260? I heard 260. I think it's 231. It's 200 something. So very, very potent. All right. Quick quiz. You know your carbons. Very good. Okay, when I said the devil is in the detail, I'm just going to give you an example to just, again, reinforce the fact that you absolutely have to check. So one example is plantations. Plantations are regulated in New South Wales, but not in Queensland. So in every single application for the CER, you have a field that says you have to tick whether does your project require regulatory approval, right? Well, if you're doing a EMP project, an environmental plantation project in Queensland, you can tick yes. In New South Wales, not. So, and I don't know about any other states. So when every time you do a project, make sure that you understand the regulation around your project and whether your project actually requires regulatory approval, right? So plantation in New South Wales, you have to ask New South Wales DPI for permission to actually do a plantation. That's nice. Now there's also, devil is in the detail, the definition of new irrigation in the soil carbon method 21. So one of the activities that you can do to increase your soil carbon in the method is new irrigation. So in the method, you have an extract there. New irrigation means new or additional irrigation applied to the land in a project area for a project using, I can't see what or something, through irrigation efficiency savings made after the date on which a Section 27 declaration of the project was made. Cool enough. So new irrigation means new irrigation through irrigation efficiency. Clear enough for everybody? All right. Well, when you read that, you need to make sure that you understand every single term on that definition, because it turns out that irrigation efficiency saving has actually a definition a bit further up, which means the improvement to the efficiency of the irrigated water was, if your project was declared after August 21, the irrigation efficiency must have been made on an irrigation infrastructure which is located within the project area. Okay. If your project was declared before, it's on-farm irrigation infrastructure, period. It doesn't have to be in your project area. The very important consequence is, if your landholder wants to use new irrigation by, for example, having better gutters on their shed to capture the water, you have to make sure that will only be eligible if the sheds are in the project area. So you need to carve out your project area, including the sheds. If they're not, you can't use that irrigation savings. So the devil is really in the detail, because that little definition will dictate how you define your project area for the landholder. Okay, so the takeaway of that is look up everything 20 times. And if you're not sure exactly what they mean, check with the CER. They're really, really happy to answer questions. They'll give you very detailed and complete answer. So if you're not 100% sure of what something means, check with the CER. Send them a question at the inquiries mailbox, and they'll answer. They're very happy with that. Any questions so far? Anything on the mirror board, Andrew?
There's been a few questions. So Peter had one, which was a good one. Peter, what was your question? Can you use multiple project areas on one land holding?
Yes. But yes, most of the methods allow it. I'll have to check, because you have to check everything. I think there's one method that you need to have only one project area. I can't remember, but yes, you can have multiple project areas. Now, there are limits to the distance between project areas, and that is specified either in the method or in the CFI mapping guidelines. You have a concept of radius in which the project area must be confined, and it depends on the method. That is either specified on the methods or the CFI mapping guidelines. But generally speaking, yes, you can have more than one project area.
Whilst we've got a break in proceedings, has anybody got a burning question? Turn off your mic or turn on your mic and call it out. Nope.
Nope, good.
But just a quick one, Wardy.
Oh, sorry. Go for it, Sarah.
Just in consideration of the last comment that you made, what is the consideration then for a catchment basis? You know, if you've got a neighbour that's just has got, you know, a project put in, is then there a distance from their project that you've got to be considered as well? So you've got to think of things on a catchment basis?
Christophe, I don't believe it matters, but Christophe, over to you.
No, there isn't. So if there are two different projects, that you can do absolutely whatever you, as long as they're not overlapping, but they shouldn't, because that's another thing, is projects must be strictly within cadastral boundaries. Now, if your neighbors has a project, you can be completely different. Now, if your neighbors has a project, you should consider doing it with them so that you save on audit costs and aggregate those two projects through RFM. Aggregated project we can talk about are not common, but they're better because they're usually cheaper. But usually it's one property, one project, or sorry, I should say one landowner, because it can have multiple properties, one project. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. I guess it's intriguing that that's the case, considering, you know, it's obviously not to do with distance from one project to another as such, in terms of what we've got the area that's got to be left between, if you can have a neighbour's one right up to it. Anyway.
Yeah. I know. Oh, there's, believe me, there's quite a few things that make you scratch your head a little bit. Sorry, you just made me think about something which we'll cover in mapping as well, probably, but I want to mention it here. When you do the mapping, remember that project have to be strictly within the official boundaries, and in most farms, the official boundaries are not the fences. So you have to put your project boundaries where the actual boundaries are, not where the fences are. Most of the time, they're strikingly different. So, which might mean that you might have a strip of 50 meters that's missing from a project. But That's the way. Remember that as well when you're doing your mapping. Cool.
One
Okay.
more question
Before-
from Peter has
Yeah.
just come in.
Go for it.
The question was, how set in stone is this legislation, and does it have ongoing changes, amendments?
Good question. Good question. It's a very good question, actually. It's very set in stone. The CFI Act was done in 2011. The rules were done in 15. The methods were published. The first methods were published, I think, in 13. That was HIR and an FMR. The last one was published in 22 or 23. That's a plantation method. Now, it changes, it's very set in stone, i.e. it's law. And that's a good question, actually, to understand the behavior of the guys at the CER, guys and girls. They actually are very helpful, right? They will try their best to make your project successful. I find that time and time again, but they're bound by law. The legislation is actually, it is law, and therefore they can't break the law and bend it. They just can't. So they might seem rigid at times, but it's just because it's a law. Now it evolves. You have updates to the act and to the rules from time to time, not very often, because it's not easy to change a law. I think the last update to the rules was in 2019. You've got updates to the methods from time to time as well. Soil carbon, for example, you've got a 2014 version, a 2018 version, and a 2021 version. So the multiple versions of the methods. The methods also have a sunset date, which is pretty important. They auto-sunset, they auto-repeal after 10 years. Right, so the two methods that were published in 2013, which are an FMR, actually self-repealed last year, which is a problem because they haven't been replaced. Avoided environmental planting self-repeals 30 September this year, and the CER is, or DQ, because it's not the CER doing it anymore, is furiously trying to replace it in time. Avoided clearing self-repeals in March next year. So, and every time a method ends, there's a new one that's slightly different. So short answer to your question is, the legislation is very strict, but it's evolving, and the methods especially evolve all the time.
Christophe, we've had another question. These are great.
Yep. Yeah.
Are you aware of when the integrated farm method might come out?
Integration farm and land management method, the famous, the Loch Ness monster. No, the latest update from the CER. So there was a bunch of technical workshops back in March, April, I think. They've now closed that. They've submitted the method to IRAC, which stands for something consultation committee. It's the committee which is in charge of verifying that the method complies with the integrity principle of the Act, i.e., you can't cheat, basically, that it's only credits for additional and new activities, etc., that it's rigorous. It's the thing that protects the value of an ACU. So the IRAC consultation is pretty important. It's unless it's supposed to be coming out in August, I think, and after that, the minister has to make a determination and publish the method as law. So best guess is end of this calendar year, end of calendar year 24. But it's not the first time that there's something wrong. There's something, a spanner comes up and in the works, and it's delayed again. So they're really trying their best to, as you know, to publish that method because it replaces it replaces HII and FMI, and it also extends soil carbon into forested areas. So it's a pretty important one. But my best guess is end of this calendar year. Anything else?
Thanks, mate. I think you're good.
No worries. Alrighty. So before starting the registration, as I said, make sure that you've got all your T's dotted and your I's crossed, because that'll avoid questions from the CER. Now, there's a risk that a CER actually refuses declaration of your project, either on grounds or technical grounds. For example, you know, they don't, for a soil carbon project, they don't think your activities are actually additional or new, but also on procedural grounds. If I'm sorry, if you don't respond quickly enough, they give you a delay to respond to a question, and if you don't respond to that within that delay, they actually have the ability to cancel your application and refuse the project, which is a not good thing, because there's a tick box somewhere in the application that says you have never been refused a project. So if you let the clock tick and you don't respond in time, then you might be refused the project, which is a problem. So all that to say, again, is just try to make sure that you got everything right the first time. So with the landholder, you've got to check carefully eligibility, willingness, and understanding. Eligibility of the project, willingness to actually undertake the project, and understanding of both the obligation that a CR project entails and the financials. We talk about the financials on Thursday, so I won't talk about them now. But eligibility importantly includes newness, and that's something that is not, you've got to check carefully, because it's not well understood usually by landowners, so they might forget to tell you something which actually voids newness, or do something that actually voids newness. There are other subtle eligibility requirements, like land use for avoided clearing. There's a requirement somewhere that after each clearing event of an avoided clearing cycle, the land must have been used for cropping or grazing. So you're going to prove that the land has been in use for cropping or grazing, which is not very easy to prove usually. Every method has usually specified black and white what the evidence required is. So when you tackle a project, bring out the method and make yourself a list of the evidence required, right? RFM has great little summaries of each method that, you know, saves you rereading the method every time, which is sort of a checklist from the method that highlights those things. But if you don't have them, then bring out the method and list every evidence that you will be required, and make sure you understand them. Like, for example, new irrigation, that it has to be in the CEA and not outside the CEA. So some requirements are very specific, some of them not at all. For example, there's for avoided clearing, it's specified that the CEA has to be uniformly of the same vegetation type. What does that mean? So if you have a suspicion that your CEA might not be, ring the CER and say, this is the situation, is it uniform vegetation type? In Queensland, you can use the regional ecosystem mapping to just, you know, make sure that your CEA is in a single regional ecosystem, otherwise split it in two. But some, you know, requirements are pretty vague, so you've got to clarify them with the CER. Make sure that the landholder also, I'm sorry, I've got something in my throat. I do apologize, coughing all the time. You got to explain the monitoring requirements to the landholder. Depending on the method, they can be quite light. For example, in the case of avoided clearing, but sometimes they can be a little bit involved. For example, for soil carbon, they have to monitor the presence of livestock in the CEA by cattle class, old, young, and medium, to the day. So you need to be able to report, cows have spent, 57 cows have spent 163 days in the CEA this year. 27 calves have spent 57 days in the CEA, which, is a pretty good recording system. Nothing's terrible, but a pretty good recording system. So make sure that, depending on the method, the landholder actually understands exactly what they're going to have to do, which again is usually pretty light for some methods, but that in some cases they have to do that. We'll come back on Friday on the monitoring requirement, because for notification purposes, for example, there are actually penalties, financial penalties, to not reporting some incidents in the CEA. So you've got to make sure that the landholder understands that very well. By the same token, sorry, excuse me, I'm going to put myself on mute a second.
While Christophe is coughing, hey, Kath Allen, Phil Till might have found your problem with getting full cam to work if you're on Mac. It doesn't love Mac, it only likes Windows operating systems. And for anybody else, I've had similar problems on my Mac. Use Windows where you can.
Yeah, well, I forgot to mention that you have to use a real computer to run full cam. Sorry.
We'll load a fake one up onto your Mac. You can load a Windows.
Yeah, you can use Boot Camp or a virtualization software to load up full cam. Yeah, to get around those sort of limited thinkers.
Full cam thinkers. Full cam's pretty old and clunky, so yeah, I'm not surprised it doesn't run on the Mac. But yeah, thank you for filling the void, Rory. Yeah, so make sure that the landholder understands exactly what they're setting themselves up for, but at the same time be balanced about the permanence requirements. The landholders will be worried about, setting themselves up for 25 years. When the permanence requirements, making sure that your forest doesn't burn away. We'll talk about them more on Friday. They're not that bad, so be balanced about that, because there are things that are probably harder to do than meeting the permanence requirements. So make sure that they don't go, oh, this is all too hard, right? They need to understand that it's not a joke. You have to actually maintain the carbon stock. Otherwise, you'll have to relinquish the accus that you've been awarded. But you really have to be negligent to come to that, right? One thing that also you have to warn the landholder about is the time it'll take, the number of questions and the paperwork that will come with an application, because I'm yet to find a project, and I've done, I don't know, close to 20 that goes through without questions and come back. That is my personal challenge, is to have one that goes through straight. But there's always, and interestingly as well, you get some questions sometimes are inconsistent. The CR, sometimes they ask you one thing and the next project they ask you something different and inconsistent with the previous one. So, but warn the landholder, because sometimes it's just like, oh, I can't believe it, they're coming back with questions. The last project that I did, I was asked, 3 times to resubmit a proof of ID because it wasn't exactly right every time. I think the second time is because the landholder forgot to copy the reverse of their driver's license to be certified. I should have checked because I know it's both sides of the driver's license, but I forgot, and bang, we got it back. So yeah, so that'll happen for one reason or the other. So warn the landholder that there will be questions and paperwork at all, and you'll have to provide certified copies of lots of things. But it's worth it at the end of the day. Be also aware that most of the concept of a carbon project are quite unfamiliar. Carbon sequestration, and it's not something that is completely familiar or what you have to do. So read for understanding with the landholders and give examples, because it's not something that is everybody's familiar with. For example, one of the ones that I've found often is that there's confusion between neutrality and carbon farming. A lot of times you hear landholders saying, "I want to do a carbon neutral project," as opposed to a carbon farming project, and the implication that doing a carbon farming implies that they're going to be carbon neutral. So just proceed slowly with those things and make sure that it's what they're going to do is absolutely clear. Now, if you're an advisor, to be down to brass tacks, the funding for all those activities will be different on the face. For example, when you, especially in the case of the work we run projects at RFM, all the questions before actually starting the application project might chew up quite a bit of time, and maybe more time than you think. So plan for that. It depends on the landholders, of course. Some of them will have done their, due diligence, and they will have every answer ready, which is great. But some might not, and come back and think about it and take forever to answer your question. So that might chew more time than you think. Right? Any question? No? Cool.
Yeah, we've got one more question's come in. About proponent-led methodologies.
Yeah.
Do you have a view on what the committee's opinion is of proponent-led methodologies and how they plan that they will come out in practical terms?
It was one of the requirements of the IQ review that be included the DQ, because DQ is driving method development, welcomes them, and they believe that it's something that should be done, because that's how we'll get the highest possible participation. Now, when you read the current method, and you think that you'll have to create that on your own, not everybody will be able to do a method. It'll be, I think the biggest CSPs will produce methods. Some large proponents themselves who wants to do a project very specific to them will do a method. But the method will have to, there's a technical committee that will have to review them, and then IRAC will have to approve them and make sure that they're meeting the integrity principles, and then they have to be approved. It's not going to be for everybody to do your own method. I was about to say something else. Yes, just to give you an example, for example, there was in the IFLM discussion, there was a discussion as to whether we should allow to what degree we should allow the collection of fruit and nuts from a CEA, because that reduces the carbon sequestered right? And whether that still applies, whether it's for indigenous practices, traditional indigenous practices purposes. So just to give you an example of the level of detail of the thinking that goes through a method, I don't know many proponents who will have to be the ability or the appetite to go through that level of thinking so that you guarantee that it'll pass the rack. So I wish that there's more proponents-led methods so that we have more methods and we have more projects and more flexible projects and projects that are more suited to the reality of farming. But I'm not sure that it's going to be that easy to do. Does that answer your question?
Thanks, Christophe.
Yeah. Cool. So in terms of understanding eligibility, that slide is a framework that I usually use to explain to the landholders what they'll have to do. So explain to them that they will have to run a project, they need to have assets that meets the requirements of the method, and not only the requirements of the method, but also give them an economic project. That they need to meet eligibility, a lot of different eligibility requirements. They'll have obligations, and there are some risks in terms of reversal, but that's not the worst. Lower yields than expected, for example, that you don't run that risk with a full cab method, but for soil carbon, for example, you run the fact that the risk that you won't have the yield that you expected out of your project, right? Quick quiz. Talking about yield. What do you think the usual yield of a planting method is? Oh, before I should give the definition of yield. Yield, when I say yield, I talk about the tons of CO2e per hectare per year that will be sequestered. So, quick quiz. Average yield of a planting project. Tick tock, tick tock, tick. Any idea? Kim, you should know that.
We have different answers coming through. We've got 16, we've got 3 ton, we've got a
Quick
variety.
schedule. That's my question.
13.
13
13.
from Vince and Colette.
Not bad. Not bad. Okay. Average, I usually say about, and I know you shouldn't say average between two numbers, and average is a number, is not an interval, but average is somewhere between 15 and 20. However, I've seen between 4 and 60.
Where was 60?
60, yeah. 60
Where?
tons of
What kind of product?
Where?
Project?
Yeah. It was an environmental planting project.
I think the question is what location?
Like tropical North
location.
Queensland.
No, not even. It was not far from here, from where I am. So central Queensland, complete nondescript area. Yeah, that was fell off my chair when I saw that. Oh, good for the landowner. Can you imagine? 60? Yeah. And not far from here, in Bundaberg, that was a 4 tons per hectare, which is pitiful. And the poor landowner, they only had something like 40 hectares as well. So it was just, barely a soil carbon project. So varies a lot, but yes, if you strike at 15, you're not wrong. On average, that's where it usually falls. If you close it to 20, you're happy. Cool. All right, additionality and newness. So be prepared, and you most probably have heard that already. That's unfair, because the requirement for a carbon project is that your project is both new and additional, and therefore, and other, if not, you're not gonna get credit for it. So there's a clear rationale for it, and usually most landowners understand the logic behind it. Oh, by the way, we can actually, what is the logic for having additional units in your scheme? Anyone?
The federal government doesn't want to give you money for something that you were doing already.
That's it. It's a way to say it. It's because it's a scheme that's exactly it. It's a scheme that's meant to be incentivizing change. So it's specifically designed to change people's behavior. And if people are already doing it, or if you were going to be forced to do it by another means, if it's required by law, for example, well, it's not that you're not doing the right thing, but it's just that it doesn't fall within the scope of the scheme, which is to incentivize change and new projects. So it might seem unfair because a lot of people say, oh, but I'm doing the right thing. Yes, but precisely you're doing it, so you don't need to be incentivized for it. So there you go. Examples of additionality. Cat B in Queensland, which Cat B refers to, for people not in Queensland, Cat B refers to areas on your land that you're not allowed to clear. So a project cannot run on Cat B because you're already not allowed to clear the trees. So it's not additional because you're already obligated by law to not clear. What I've copied below are the newness examples of newness to decide whether a project has begun or not. Note that it says the following are examples when a project is deemed to have begun, right? So it's not an exhaustive list. The CER may deem that because you've done this, your project is actually not new. Right, so on the left, you've got everything that does not mean that your project has actually started. If you're planning, if you're obtaining regulatory approval, if you're obtaining advice, etc., that's fine. Your project hasn't started. But as soon as you do any of the things on the right, then your project is deemed to have started. It's to the point where if you see, I think, E, if you buy tube stock or seeds, or you order them at a nursery, then your planning project is not eligible. I had a case of B recently where a landowner has applied a soil key renovator, and he just made himself ineligible for soil carbon, which is what he wanted to do. So make sure that your landowners understand that and don't do anything before they worked out if their project is valuable. So that's a framework that I usually use to communicate to the landowners that if you want to, whatever you do has to be new. Be careful that you don't change anything to your farm practices, to your grazing management. You don't plant anything, you don't fertilize, you don't clear, you don't irrigate, you don't touch anything, you don't change anything until you know that your project's going to be accepted. What time is it, Morty?
It is 7:35, so 10 minutes till break time, mate.
That slide is pretty long.
Do you want to have a break now and come back
So we're
up?
doing good for time. If everybody's happy with that, probably better before we jump into this one, because that's the crux of the process. So why don't we have a, I don't know, 15-minute break and everybody come back in 15 minutes? Is that okay?
Yep, there's just 15 minutes. We'll see us back here at 10 to 8 people. One quick question for you to consider on the break, Christophe, which was, a second one has come in as well. Kath is asking about fences, and I was going to say the consultation for environmental plantings will allow you to get seed stocks, whereas previously that was an excluded, that would have made you ineligible for newness, but you can source
Correct.
and purchase seedlings or tube stock in anticipation of a project when the new method comes out in a couple of months' time. Right now, it's still ineligible, but it won't be in the future. And Kath Allen is saying, what about fencing, say following floods, and then you do a tree planting? Would putting up a fence along a river, a riparian area, for example, which you were wanting to do following a flood, but if that also fenced in your proposed CEA, would that rule you in or out in terms of eligibility and newness?
I'll just give that answer. So yes, about the seed stock, and actually the public consultation is open for the new EMP. So have a look at it, and if you have opinions, please, to simplify the method, please put in a comment on that. Fences in that specific case, I don't think it would disqualify you, because the fence is not the main purpose. Sorry, the project is not the main purpose of the fence. If it's been taken away by floods, or if you want to protect your riparian areas, it's not the main purpose of the fence. So in that specific case, I don't think it would, but it's definitely a case of checking with the CER for this one. Absolutely, because you don't want to go any further than that if they don't think so, or you don't want to do the fence before you do the project if they think it would be disqualifying you. Yeah.
As always, the answer is let me check. Everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
See you back here in now 11 minutes at 10 to 8.
See you.
All right, Christophe, I think we need to call everybody back.
Everybody back.
Well done. Very authoritative. Over to you, mate.
All right. Good. So this is the crux of it. This is what you've always wanted to know.
Yours? Mine might be over the phone. Oh, you haven't muted.
Yep, you're on mute now. Yeah. So the process you've always wanted to know about. This is the submission process for a CER project. It starts on the left with you, and you're logging into the portal. We'll come back to that later, but note that you can be an agent or a key contact for the project. You'll have to decide about that. We'll come back to that. So you, first thing, will need to log in the CER portal. Then you will need to find a form to submit a project application. Now, one of the obvious questions there immediately is, how do you define your project? As I said, if it's just one project, one landowner, one property, quite easy to define the project. The project is the project you're talking about. If you have the possibility of doing an aggregation project, then it becomes a lot more complex, but also probably a lot more interesting for the landholders potentially. But anyway, we're not going to talk about aggregation project. Assuming it's just a single project, you find the form and start a project application form. To do a project, you need a proponent. A proponent does not have to be necessarily the landowner. Typical example are RFM projects. When RFM is the proponent of the project and the land for the landowner. Now, the landowner is an interesting concept that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. The one thing that you need is the land title that defines the landowner, that allows you to define the proponent. And that proponent will need to give an authority to sign to whomever is filling in the project application. So typically, you log into the CER project. You select the proponent depending on what's on the land and title, and that proponent gives you an authority to sign. Right? If you want to sign the project application and not the proponent themselves. Another interesting things is that if the proponent is not the landowner, they will have to give, the landowner will need to have to give legal rights to the proponent, because it is the landowner that actually gives the proponent the right to conduct the project on their land. Now, most importantly, it is the proponent who has the right to conduct the project, but also had the right to be issued accused, right? So if you are a landholder and you're giving legal rights to the proponent, you're actually giving them legal rights to the accused that are going to be generated by the project. So the legal rights document is a pretty important one because it gives the landowner, the proponent, it means that it's the proponent that is going to receive the accused. We'll go into in next slides detail about who the landowner is depending on the land titles in the identity section, because that's a little bit tricky. But whomever you choose to be the project proponent, that entity or person will need what's called a CIA, which is another form in the CER system. It stands for Client Information Application or something like that. It's basically the form that will define the identity of the proponent in the CER system. Mind you, having an identity in the CER system is not the same as a login. So you can log in a CER system. It does not matter. It does not mean that they recognize you as having an identity capable of being a proponent. To be a proponent, you need a CIA, which does not imply that you have a login. Right? So to get a CIA, it's a second application that you run in parallel with the project application, where you fill what's called a client information form, where you have, your birth detail, and if it's an individual, birth detail, and who you are and where you live, and et cetera, et cetera. And you have to submit the documentation that verifies your identity. That is entirely dependent on what form is the proponent. If the proponent is an individual, the proof of ID will be just, a copy of, as I mentioned before, a copy of your driving license and, latest rates notice, less than 3 months, certified copies of all that. And you also have, so that's identity, proof of ID for an individual. Proof of ID for a corporate, for example, will be the ASIC registration documents of that corporate. Same thing for a trust. You need to provide the ASIC registration document of the trust, right? So that's all the proof of ID that goes with the client information form to register the CIA, to give the proponent an identity that allows that person to be a proponent for the project application, which we haven't started yet. Now, another thing that needs to be in support of the client information form is what is called an FPP, a fit and proper person. So you have to demonstrate that you're a fit and proper person. Again, depending on the form of the proponent, that fit and proper person test is different. If it's a corporation, you must not have breached the Corporation Act, blah, and never have been declared insolvent, and et cetera, et cetera. If you're an individual, to be a fit and proper person, you need to never have been convicted of criminal, et cetera, et cetera. So the form of exactly an FPP test is different, depending on the form of the proponent. Right? So far, we've just started a project application by clicking. If you log into the CER system, you've got a collection of what they call forms. Each corresponds to a method. So you click on soil carbon, for example, and you start. And very early in the process, you hit a question, which is, who is your project proponent? And you don't need a approved CIA to register your proponent of your draft project. You don't even need to have a submitted CIA to be the draft proponent of your draft project. You just need to have started on the CIA so that you can progress the CIA application in parallel with the project application. However, you need to have, before you can see the little box submit right here, after you filled in the documents, you can only submit a project application after you have submitted the CIA of the proponent. Yay. Told you there was some, bureaucracy galore coming. So you need to do your CIA. And when you actually submit the application, somebody has to sign it. That person needs to have authority from the proponent to sign it. It can be you who signs it, in which case the proponent, whether it's an individual or a trust or something, has to give you a signed piece of paper that says that you have the authority to sign the application on your behalf. But if the proponent, for example, is a corporate and a director of that specific entity wants to sign the application, you need to prove that that individual had an authority to sign on behalf of that corporation. So you need to have an ASIC extract that shows the director of the company to prove that the individual, because it can only be an individual, signing the submission has actually the authority to sign and therefore is a director. Or you need to have a director mentioned on the ASIC document, sign a piece of paper that gives the authority to sign to the person who's actually going to sign, right? You're starting to feel that your head is going to explode, and yes, I do understand that. There is nothing like actually, we'll go into more examples, so it's a lot clearer with an example, but there's actually nothing like doing it to actually get a feel for it, which is why the practical exercise that we'll talk about at the end is for this week to actually get your own login and start a project application up to, but not submitting it. That'll make you go through all those hoops and understand them a lot better. They're not difficult, they're just incredibly tedious and complex, and you just have to go through all the examples. And on Friday, because no doubt when you go through that, you'll have 1.5 million questions. I can answer all the questions that you have about what about that case and what about this case, right? But so far where we're at, you've just started a project application by clicking on a form that opens. You go to I need a proponent. You submit a CIA. You need you open a draft CIA from the proponent that you've selected. And you start collecting the client information form, the fit and proper person test information, and the proof of ID, depending on what form you have given to your proponent. Coming back to you, the agent or the key contact, you, if you're not the proponent, of course, can be the agent for the proponent. There's a question that says, does your project have an agent? You click on yes, and it says, who is the agent? And you can be the agent for the proponent, but you don't have to be. You can be only the key contact, right? And I do advise you to be the key contact, because basically the key contact is the person who's going to receive all the communication from the CER about that project. So you can nominate someone else, but if that someone else, for example, is someone at the proponent, there'll just be a mailbox because the questions need to come back to you. So you can be an agent, but don't have to. If you are an agent, though, you need to prove that you have a legal agreement with the proponent to act on their behalf. But strangely enough, if you don't click on my project has an agent, then you can just continue the process on behalf of the proponent without having to prove it. Just register yourself as a key contact. Just one. Sorry, quick thing on the CER system. Unfortunately, we're in a position at the moment where the CER is in transition between two systems. One of them is called client portal, the other one is called online services. And some forms are on the old system, the client portal, some forms are on the new system, online services, and the two do not communicate. So make sure that if you want to register a proponent for a project that is in online services, make sure that you start the CIA for that proponent in online services as well. Otherwise, you won't be able to use the CIA for that CIA for that project. Right? Once the CIA is accepted, you can use it from one system to the other, but not before it's submitted. Now that problem is going to disappear very quickly because the client portal fully transitions to online services by, I think, end of August this year. So temporary problem, but if you register a project in the meantime, yeah, you'll have the problem. Guido, now the documents, we'll talk about in more detail about the documents that you need to attach to your project application. Some of them are, just administrative document like the legal rights and the stuff like that. Some of them are the more technical document that you need to submit for a given method. And some of them will need the intervention of specialized expertise, which you may or may not have. Typically, you will need an agronomist for soil carbon projects because the land management strategy, which is a key document for the soil carbon application, has to be verified by a third party agronomist who is qualified as per the CER requirements to sign on land management strategy, and they have to prove in that document that they have the right required qualification. What they need to, and they need to sign it, so they take their job very seriously usually. They need to certify that the activities that the proponent intends to do have the potential to actually increase the sequestration of carbon, right? So coming back to what we covered before in terms of what you have to do before, make sure before you start a soil carbon project that the landowner really understand what is the meaning of the new activity, in what way it is new, in what way it has the meaning to, it has the potential to meaningfully influence the sequestration of soil carbon. And you probably have to engage the discussion with the agronomist before starting the project so that you're very clear as to what the landowner intends to do will meet those requirements, right, to the detail. For example, it's not enough to say, I'm going to plant legumes. They might, and the agronomist might ask you, what type of legumes? What did you have before? Did you not have legumes in your pasture, right? Or, were they too dispersed or too old, or so that they understand what the baseline is of your project, and that the fact that what you're doing is new or substantially different, and will guarantee the sequestration of carbon in the soil. That's for soil carbon. For plantings, for example, you don't have to submit something which is certified by a third-party expert, but you'd be well advised to have an ecologist who can describe, there's a requirement to describe what seeds you're going to use, what sort of, where the source are seeds from, how can you prove that they are actually representative of the local vegetation community, etc. You will need that ecologist as well to depending on your soil type, on your slope aspects, etc., pick the right planting geometry with how many rows you're going to have, how many inter-rows you're going to have, etc., etc. So that again, you'd be well advised to engage the ecologist ahead of time so that they can prepare that document for you. It's not something that you strictly need to prepare before, because by the letter of the law, you only need to, at the application stage for a planting project, you only need to have the CEA. That's it. And you need to make sure that the CEA was clear of forest cover in the 5 years before the project application, etc., etc. But inevitably for planting project, the CER comes back with a question, how can you prove that your planting will be consistent with that? So you need to prove that you have the expertise to make sure that your project will be compliant in the future with the eligibility requirements related to species, etc. Right?
Christophe, can I jump in and ask a few questions, or
you absolutely may.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So there's a question about the key contact versus the agent, and where there's a key contact, is the agent like the landholder in that respect, or is the key contact a contact within the agent organization?
They're independent. You can nominate a key contact which is not in the agent, but normally you would if the project has an agent. For example, as an advisor, if you're acting as an agent for the landholder, you would nominate yourself as a key contact. It would be very odd for the project to have an agent and the key contact not be part of that agent, but you can do it if you want.
And then the second question is there a like a third-party experts list, and do they have to be recognized by the CER, or is it you as a proponent recognizing that they're a third party and they're an expert?
The latter. In the soil carbon method, there's a list of sort of requirements for the third-party certifier of the land management strategy. It says must have experience in agronomy, in soil agronomy, must have had involvement in soil carbon projects before. So there's a list of requirements like that, but there's no, as opposed to auditors that have to be NGER registered auditors. The agronomist for soil carbon does not have to be registered. It's you making sure that they have the capabilities that satisfies the requirements of the method.
Brilliant. And I think that's it for now. Mike has made some great comments, as has Kim, about where to contact experts at a state base, and that your experts will need to provide a CV when you lodge. So one other thing is, if, for example, you're keen to do a soil carbon project because you do time controlled grazing, don't have your agronomist say, I've been doing time controlled grazing with this client for 8 years and we're just going to continue doing what we've been doing, because that won't satisfy the newness test. So brief your agronomist and or ecologist appropriately.
And good comment about the CV. Yes, they will have to provide a CV. I usually include the CV in the land management strategy, so that just don't have another document to attach. But yes, they will have to provide a CV and formally sign the document. It's a great idea to have a list. I usually use 2 agronomists. Depending on location of the project, I'll put them somewhere there so that you can use them if you want to. Good. So once you've got your project application, your CIA, all your client information form, the FPP test done, the proof of ID, all your documents, whether the Q1 from the method or the small bits and pieces ready, you can finally click. Oh, sorry, the land titles will have to be attached with the application, by the way. They don't have to be certified, but you'll have to attach them to the application. You can finally click submit, and there starts the 90 days that the CR have or endeavors to respond to your project within, to declare your project within. So they give themselves 90 days to declare your project, and they usually try to do it. The trick is that when you receive an RFIO request from information, that clock stops. So they have 90 days of thinking time, but when your ball is in your court, that clock stops, right? So that means it can extend the declaration time for quite a bit if you don't respond quickly, right? So once you've submitted, you just wait for questions and play question and answer with the CER. After that, and eventually, and you can do it in parallel, you will need an NRU account, Australian National Registry of Emission Units, which is essentially your bank account for ACCUs. So all the ACCUs generated by the project when you submit an OR, an offset report, and the offset report is accepted, all the ACCUs generated will be deposited in that NRU account, which will be in the name of the proponent, right? So automatically it'll be in the name of the proponent. Now, oh no, sorry, it's not true. The ACCUs will be deposited in the name of an NRU account in the name of the proponent. So you can open an NRU account in somebody else's name, but then the ACCUs will go nowhere. So you need an NRU account in the name of the proponent. Now, only an individual can be an authorized representative to access the ACCUs in an NRU account, right? Not so if the proponent is an entity, you will need to nominate an authorized representative when you apply for the NRU account to be able to access the ACCUs. And guess what? That authorized representative will need a CIA. So when you open the NRU account, you're back to a CIA with a client information form and an FPP and da-di-da-di-da-di-da-di-da, okay? That authorized representative, as opposed to someone being the proponent, will need a login to be able to log in into the NRU to be able to access the ACCUs. So basically, you got for a project, unless your proponent already has a CIA or an NRU account, etc. You'll need a project application, you need a CIA for the proponent, you need an application for the NRU account, and you need a CIA for the authorized representative for the NRU account. And that person would also need a login in the system. Yay. When that's all done and your project is finally declared, and I'll come to what a declaration looks like, then during the life cycle of the project, you will submit what in CR speak VARs and ORs. VARs are variations. So if, for example, you want to change the proponent of your project, you can. It's a variation application. If you want to change the project area of your project, you can. It's called it's a variation for project area. Now, be careful that it's easy to reduce a project area because they say, oh yeah, we'll just reduce it, no worries. But extending it is quite a lengthy process because basically they have to recheck eligibility for the new bits of areas that you want to add. So not a good idea to try to extend a project area at a later date. And in some instances, you can't. Some methods you can't. I think avoided clearing, for example, you can't. Can't remember exactly the reason why, but you can always shrink a project area if you want. Be aware that if you've been awarded ACCUs for the area that you shrink, you don't have to relinquish them. Right.
Christophe, there's a good question here from Liz.
Yep.
And so what happens in 25 years if the proponent no longer exists? Does the so you know, what are the rights of transference from a proponent to the next generation or the incoming owner of the land. Maybe that is something we'll cover on Friday in the FAQs, but throwing it out there now.
Oh, very, very good question. It's actually one of the notification requirements is that any substantial changes in the proponent will have to notify, and there's one that you have only 3 months to notify. So whether there's, even if it's a corporate which is a proponent and there's a significant change in their corporate structure, you have to notify that, to notify the CER. So if the proponent disappears, it's really not a problem. I've done it a couple of times. It's not a problem to change a proponent, as long as, well, I'll come to the obligations. As long as the new proponent accepts to be the proponent of the project, is really dead easy. It takes a couple of weeks. There's a VAR form for it, and as long as the new proponent accepts to be the proponent, it's Bob's your uncle. And as long as, of course, the landowner gives them legal rights to receive the accused, that's not a problem at all. The obligation on the proponent, all the project obligations are on the proponent, none on the landowner. So the proponent, the new proponent has to be sure to know what they're accepting. The only obligation on the landowner ever is that if you are required to relinquish accuse and you don't, or you don't satisfy your permanence obligation, then I don't remember the exact term, a land can be imposed on the land. So basically the CER can impose something on your title to make sure that the sequestration of the permanence obligations are maintained on the land. But that's only in very severe cases, but it's the only obligation that can ever be applied on the land. All the other obligations on the project are on the proponent. Don't know what's coming in. Right.
And does the proponent take up the ANRU account, and that's how they get paid if they've taken up the proponent role?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, good question. Don't know. I'll have to check, because you always must check. If you change the proponent, it's a proponent making an OR. OR, sorry, stands for offset report. Is when you actually claim the accuse. It's the proponent submitting the OR who will receive the accuse. So if you're a new proponent, you'll need a new ANRU account, of course, and the accuse will be sent to your account. So when you're a new proponent, you automatically get the accuse that are generated, because you're going to be the one submitting the offset report. Right.
Thank you. Good question.
But you don't, yeah. But you don't take over the existing ANRU account, because that's the ANRU account is in the name of the previous proponent. So you'll need you need a new ANRU account. Yeah. Any other question? No.
There's a gazetted road through my planting, i.e. Crown land. Do I need Charles III to do a CIA?
That is actually a good question and a trap for young player in mapping. And I must admit, Kim knows that I fell into that trap recently for Rosemary Hill. I forgot to check about the gazetted road. I know you don't need Charles III to fill a CIA, but you need to exclude it from the project area. You're not allowed easements like power, energy easements, gazetted roads, stuff like that. You need to exclude from your mapping. Yeah. Alrighty.
Mike's making some really good comments in there too. Thanks, Mike. Keep it up.
Cool, Mike. Thanks. Thanks for the help. Righto. Oops, I've lost my mouse. All right. So identity, we've touched a little bit on that. We're going to go a little bit of some case detail because you might find yourself in those cases. So the key identity elements that we've spoken so far are your login and key contact information, the proponent's CIA, RFM if you're submitting a project for RFM, the ANRU authorized CIA application. So they're the 4 identity elements, all right? In online services and in online services only, the proponent or its authorized representative, strangely enough, because it's not the case in Time Portal, also needs a login, because to give you authority to act on their behalf, the system sends an email to the person you nominate, asking them to confirm that you can act on their behalf. So even if they're never going to touch a system again, the proponent in online services need to get themselves a login so that they can receive that email, allowing you to act on their behalf. If that same person is also going to be the ANRU authorized representative, you need to note their CER number. When you create yourself a login into the CER systems, you use an email address and a password. They give you a CER number, so CER 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which you need to keep carefully because it's very useful after to be able to refer to. So, for example, if you want to say that individual is going to give me authority to sign, you need to refer to them by their CER number. So when the proponent creates a login in online services for the purpose of giving you authority to sign, make sure that they note there and give you their CER number, because it's a lot easier to refer to them that way. All right. Once you've started a client registration in your login, in most cases, there are some exceptions, but in most cases, you are the only one to be able to access it. So be aware that if you want to share the load of filling that project, for example, or if you are an organization and you do multiple projects and you have multiple people working on them, they will need to share a login, right? To be able to access. You can't share an application between logins. It's one login. The login that creates the application is the only one who can work on them. So if you want to share that, you're not going to have to share logins, which is a pain because that login is a key contact. That login will receive all the queries for all the projects that are under that proponent's name. It's a bit of a pain, but that's the way it's structured, right? So sharing project applications is a bit of a pain. So make sure that when you want to do it, you create a sort of generic login for your organization so that multiple people can actually share that login. Okay. Things to remember about the CIA, but I've mentioned them. It doesn't allow access to the ANRU. The ANRU account is an authorized representative. I mentioned that. Needs to be submitted before the project application. Mentioned that again, because you can't submit a project application if the CIA hasn't been submitted. The landholder in the legal rights document must give legal rights to the proponent exactly as the CIA is labeled, right? And the CIA is created automatically. By that I mean is if the land is in the name of a we'll cover that in the example actually. So hold that thought. But make sure that whenever you do those legal rights document or authority to sign, you use exactly the same description. Otherwise, the CR will come and say, "Oh, they're the same person," and rightfully so, because you might trick them into giving rights to somebody who is not. And usually, they prefer if you say, the trustees of the land bracket the SEN number when you're referring to an entity. So the landholder is usually identified on the title. So, but do not believe most people don't actually remember exactly what's on their title. Look at the title. You'd have surprises. People think that the title is in their name, actually in their name and their partner's name, but they just had forgotten, and it is. So look at the title. The title is very important. It also obviously identifies eligible interest holders, and also check that the land is freehold. Okay. Common cases of land ownership: individual, too easy. Tenants in common or joint tenants, in which case you need to pick one of the tenants to be the proponent. And then the other one has to give them, legal rights. Partnerships are very common. Family partnerships, for example, very common. Unfortunately, partnerships cannot be proponents. So if the land is in the name of a family partnership, that family partnership cannot be the proponent. The reason the CR gave me is that partnerships are not responsible entities. I find that great. They pay taxes and they can, own land, but they're not responsible entities. Fair enough, okay, doc. So one of the partners the partnership will have to pick one of the partners to be the individual proponent and give them legal rights to run the project. Trust. That's an interesting question as well. Make sure that the trustees cannot be proponent. The reason is that a trustee of a trust, when the trustee is a company, another very common, family trust, the trustee cannot be the proponent because the trustee does not have an ABN. A trustee company cannot have an ABN because it doesn't run a business. So the ATO does not give ABN to trustees. So the trustee cannot be the proponent. It has to be the trust who is the proponent. Corporates, simple, because they can be proponents. So each of those categories of proponents in the client information form has a specific category. So when you fill the client information form, go to, if you land owner is a trust, go to the trust section, because it's a bit muddled, but trying to find the trust section, and also the FPPs. There's an FPP checklist for each type of proponent. So, and that's what you need your proponent to fill in. So you sometimes have a choice. I'll come back to that in the example. But you need to think about who your proponent will be, whether it's going to be, in the case of a trust, for example, whether it's going to be the trust, or whether it could be if it's the family trust, it could be the trust itself who's a proponent, or one of the family members. What the best? And of those people, of those entities, who is going to be the one being the authorized representative to the annual account? Cool example. So the land title is in the name of John and Smith.
Before you jump
John and
ahead,
Peterson. Yeah, go ahead.
before you jump ahead,
Sorry,
there's questions that have come up. One on land title, with particularly referencing streams, stream orders, or wet dry creeks. If they're a river, does that act as crown land? Or for example, if it's a dry creek bed that can flood, do you have to exclude that from the area? Similarly, there's
Yeah, go ahead. No regret. Yeah, if it can flood, it's most likely going to be an ineligible land for most method. But that is a good question. I'll have to check. That is a really good question, actually. I would have said it makes you ineligible for planting, definitely. But for soil carbon, is that considered? I don't know. Good question. Don't know.
Okay. It's of interest to the hydrated biolinks concept if you've got creek lines that are, wet dry. And then eligible interest holder consent. So how we, obviously the mortgage that the bank has title over, but are there other common examples of eligible interest holder consent that you would see needing to be acquired?
Yes. Formally, and that's where it depends on your assessor. Formally, an easement, for example, that goes across your property, if you want to include that easement in your project area, then the energy company, for example, is an eligible interest holder. If you have anyone who's mentioned in your title for any reason, can be anyone mentioned in your title. That's where the CER will look for eligible interest holders. Now, in the example of tenants in common or joint tenants, the tenant that you do not pick as the proponent is an eligible interest holder as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Can a super fund, I'm assuming they mean self-managed super fund in the question, but can a self-managed super fund be a proponent?
Never had the case, so it should be because it's pretty common. Never had the case. The don't know.
Answer
does
is
it have an ABN?
Let me check.
Yeah, the answer is let me check. I don't know. I never had the case. Basically, the way it works in the system is to identify the proponent. If it's not an individual, because there's a question: is the proponent an individual or no? If it's no, then it asks you to enter the ABN. So if I don't know how SMSF are structured, but if they have an ABN, presumably yes. But you'll have to check.
There'll be other tax considerations, but we'll get to that on Thursday and Friday.
Yeah.
And mining leases or mineral leases, there's a lot of mineral sands around the Wimmera. There's a lot of concern about, you only own the top 6 inches of your land and somebody else underneath it. Do you have to seek eligible interest holder consent?
Most probably, especially for methods that are below 1 meter. I don't know. No, sorry, another good question. I don't know. I would presume the only method that you might there might be eligible interest holders would be soil carbon, because you need to be able to have to guarantee that soil will not be disturbed. You need to guarantee that the soil will not be disturbed, especially below 1 meter. So, yeah, I don't know. I'll have to check.
And all this time I've been calling Wendy Peter. Sorry, Wendy. Wendy's got a question here, which might be more of a statement, but it is like, if the proponent is working across an aggregated project with multiple timeframes and multiple sequences of getting approval, it has to be very carefully managed. And I think that is the case, Wendy. It does have to be very carefully managed. Yeah. And line up.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And that's probably when you structure your projects, that's one of the consideration. is how to, herd those cats into a project in a way that is actually manageable is one of the considerations.
Great. And given time, I'm going to suggest we've got 20 minutes left, Christophe. You go into the example and we'll ask the rest of the questions later.
Yo, no problem. I'll just go to directly to the second one. So assume the title in the name of the Ward family trustee. No, relationship with people present. Sorry, Wardy, I took your name as an example. So the title in the name of the Ward family trustee, Pty Limited, who has an ACN. The proponent will be the Ward family trust that has an ABN. Now, notice the difference is that the legal rights document will be signed by Jane and Andrew Ward, directors of the Ward family trustee, with an SCN. Giving rights to the trustee will give rights to the trust to be the proponent. To prove that, you will need a NASIC extract showing that Jane and Andrew are the directors of the trustee company, right? And the client information form would be an FPP for trust because the proponent is the trust and not the trustee. And the Andrew account will be in the name of the proponent, of course, which is the trust with an ABN. And Jane Ward will be the authorized representative, and she will need to log in and see I as an individual and an FPP with copies of latest rates notice, 3 months, etc., etc., etc. Now, the reason I put a trust as an example is because you tie yourself into knots sometimes with trust and who's a trust and the trustee. So be absolutely careful which is which. And the unfortunate thing is that the trust cannot be a proponent. Sorry, the trustee cannot be a proponent, and the trust. In Australia, the property owned by a trustee is in the name of the trustee. So, but the trustee cannot be a proponent. So only the trust can be a proponent. So you have the trustee giving the rights to the trust. And so the directors of the trustee will make the trustee give rights to the trust. So be careful when you write those documents. It's going to be a little bit intricate. And one painful point also for trust is that you will need a certified copy of your entire trust deed, of the proponent's entire trust deed attached to the application. There you go. So all that to say that identity and legal rights is a minefield. Right. The documents you'll need for a project application. So for the project itself, legal documents will be titles, legal rights document, as we've seen. Interestingly, you will need to know the NRM organization of your proponent and the name of the strategic plan of your NRM organization for the land. Do not ask me why we need that, but we need that. So, find out who's the NRM organization for your proponent and what is the name of the strategic plan of the NRM. The address of the property, of course, the local government authority, the authority to sign, or the forward abatement estimate. So an estimate of how much the project will get credits for. You can get that out of Luxi or Fullcam, depending on what sort of method it is. Don't sweat on the precision for this one. The only reason the CER wants the FAE is to be able to write up the audit schedule, because the number of audits depend on how many accus your project will generate. So if it's more than 50, if it's more than 50,000 per annum, then you'll get more than 3 audits. If it's less than 50,000 per annum, you get only 3 audits, and you'll get that at the declaration. So legal document for your project application, technical documents, depending on the method, but most method will need a permanence plan. For soil, you'll need a land management strategy. For audit clearing, you'll need an eligibility document. For plantings, you need your planting information document describing your planting geometry, etc. Mapping, You'll need one GIS file of the project area in GDA, Coordinate Reference System, with very specific fields, depending on whether you're mapping a CEA or a project area. There are templates available on the CER website for your mapping file. The upshot of it is, except for one method, which is the EMP pilot method, you cannot do, I believe, unless Google Earth has changed, you cannot do your mapping with Google Earth. You need a specific GIS software because of that requirements to have those things in GDA. Now, having said that, I have submitted a couple of mapping files by mistake. They're not in GDA, and they went through very well. So, you know, I'm just saying. But they might not have gone through. And for the CIA, you need your ABN, and you need your client information form, your proof of ID, your ASIC document, your trust deed, if need be. Voila, and then you might have your project declared. Last thing before we talk about the exercise and answer question, the must-read list. At least read the table of content of the following documents so that you know where to find the information. You don't have to, you will not anyway be able to read it in one go because you're going to fall asleep or shoot yourself. But this the CFI Act. You need to, so that you know where to find what. The CFI Act, the CFI rules, which is an addendum to the Act. The CFI mapping guideline that tells you, how to position your model points for full cam in your CEA, the methods themselves. Most methods have a method guide, which is really, really good, especially the new guides are better. For solid carbon, you have a document which is called the sampling guidance document, which is really good in terms of explain. We'll cover that on Wednesday. The full cam guide, we'll cover that tomorrow. Every method has what's called a full cam guide, which gives you step by step how to work full cam for that specific method. The EMP pilot has a set of documents online, which are far more helpful than for the normal methods. That's why I single them out. Also, note the precedence of those documents. I've listed them in precedence order. So the CFI Act defines things that can be overridden by CFI rules, that can be overridden by CFI mapping guidelines, that can be overridden by methods. The other ones are not legal document, but the first four ones are. And that's how the priority order of them applies. I've put there the link to the really, really good recent document that the CER has produced. It's at that link. There's lots of new information there that is really, really well structured. So have a look there. Key information on methods for each method. EMP, the difference between the pilot method and the full method. You need to understand that if you had to read one thing in the EMP method is the definition of calibrations, because calibration drive your yield in full cam. So you need to understand exactly what calibration you want to use for your project. Super important when you do your full cam modeling for EMP. The planting information I've mentioned describe your seed stock origin, the planting geometry, the density, the treatment, what sort of weeding you're going to do, what sort of fertilizing you're going to do, etc. For SOC, we've talked about the land management activities, the land management strategy, document the activities, the baseline data detail. The SOC you need to keep to have all the baseline information for the 5 years prior to the project. So remember those things that I talked about, the livestock that you need to keep, the livestock information you need to keep during your project. You technically need the same for 5 years prior to the project. Needless to say, I do not know any farmers who will have that sort of data. So the method allows for when you don't have the data, but it's usually penalizing you in accuracy. So make sure that your landowners dig hard for as more data they can have for their baseline period. We've talked about project areas and CEAs, mapping format. We've talked about you'll need all those things, CAT, CEB, links, vegetation status, regulations, soil types, because a CEA, for example, in planting need to be of a single soil type. If you have two different soil types, you need to break it into multiple CEAs, etc., etc. All the documents that you will need, or information that you will need for your project. And let's go to question before I talk about your practical exercise. Yes.
Okay, Christophe, bring it home. I think a lot of the questions are quite rightly, oh, it'd be good to have an example to kind of better understand this, etc. So, you know, I think once we get into the practical exercises, everyone's going to be excited to work through them. Christophe, you there?
I put myself on mute. Sorry about that. It's a really, really good comment about the example. It's really, as I said in the beginning, something that you'll have to work through to really get. It's impossible. It's so detailed and varied that it's almost impossible to explain. So, which is why the practical exercise is really important, because you'll start to flex the muscles and go through the motions of actually doing it. That's what is going to raise millions of questions. And so you have you should be doing it. So what I'll send you after this is a zip file which has one polygon from a landowner that they've done in Google Earth, so it's in KML, where they think they can do an EMP project, right? So I'll give you that, which is a rough sketch of where they think they can do an EMP. The address of the property is 1222 Clifford Lane in Danmora. And I'll also give you in that document the title document, so that you can have all the details of the title. The objective of the practical exercise is to actually roll up the sleeve, create yourself a login in a CR system, prepare the legal rights and any other legally required document, like authority to sign, etc. Trying to do as much of the mapping of the project that you can, calculate the forward abatement estimate, work through the portal application until you're ready to click submit. Right? And you don't have to do all the document to procure all the document, but if you can write up a list of all the documents that you will have to upload, and find out the template, if the CR said it must be in a specific CR, format, in a specific CR format, find out where that template, and just provide the outline, what you think, reading through the requirements of the method, what the planting support document should look like that you would attach. If you can work through that between now and Friday, you're champions, because that is not easy. But the purpose of the exercise, of course, not to click submit, but to have an example to work through and unravel all the questions that you will find, and we'll talk about them on Friday.
Wonderful. And Kim has asked, when is it due? That's Friday. How is it due, and how can it be reviewed? So we might do a screen share on Friday of a couple, but we won't get to review everybody's unless next week there's a follow-up if people want us to review your work in the portal.
Totally, absolutely, Wari. And feel absolutely free to send me emails within the limits of my availability, I will answer any question that you have, because that's the point of it. The more questions you have and the more I can answer, that's what is going to help you. So please send me questions, and if you want to have a follow-up next week to just go in more detail through your applications and where you've stumbled and what questions you have, very happy to do that as well.
Christophe, I've just provided your email address, but incorrectly. So please don't copy that, guys. It's not Chris Poe, it's Christophe at regenfarmersmutual.com.
Yeah. And as soon as we're finished, or maybe a bit later, I'll have dinner first. I'll send you that zip file with the polygon, the title document, and what else is in there. Oh yeah, and I'll add the full cam guide for what we're going to do tomorrow. So just for you to have the document tomorrow when we're into full cam.
Brilliant. Christophe, if I could get you to just stop sharing screen for a second, and we've got precisely, well, 6 minutes, let's call it 5 minutes. Any questions while you've got Christophe that are burning a hole in your head? We would love to hear them now and try and help you.
So with that project, how do we know what planting we're going to be doing? Is that in the zip file?
No, that's precisely, it's for you to work out, because you'll see on the land what is there and what you think you can do depending on what you think is the most beneficial for the landowner.
I don't think I have enough knowledge for that, but anyway, okay, good.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, because if you don't, and if you think there's I won't tell you. There's one answer to that question.
Tomorrow we'll do different forward abatement estimates using full cam, Liz, and you might get to see the difference between, say, a block planting and a strip planting, and you could maybe find out from that which gives you the better carbon yield and the better return on investment. And so you might be guided by the economics that we'll come up with on Thursday as well, to know exactly what you want to achieve for the landholder. There's sort of no right or wrong. Like, you're not going to get passed or failed anything other than this is experience and testing testing your ability to follow the bouncing ball.
To follow the bouncing ball. I actually intended to do avoided clearing tomorrow for full cam, because it works full cam a little bit more. But if everybody wants, but we'll touch about the planting, the calibration, the planting geometry, etc. Yeah.
If we could do EMP, environmental plantings, rather than avoided clearing, because
we can do that. If everybody prefers to do EMP rather than AC, I don't mind.
I think so. That majority of people are planting.
EMP. Yeah, I see lots of nodding heads. So okay, we'll do EMP. Cool. So I won't send you the full cam guide for AC that I wanted to send you. Then I'll send you the other one.
Christophe.
Oh, sorry. Are you going to cover off the economics of a project, so that, like, the costs during the week? So you take them through a financial model as well of, yep.
Thursday. Yeah. That's a session you want to attend, Ron. Because actually you'll help me a lot, because you probably have a good understanding of that. So yes, Thursday.
Any other questions? Is everybody emotionally and mentally exhausted? Imagine living in Christophe's head, right? Like,
and wait until you have to figure it out for yourself. Because I've picked an example with a trap. You'll see.
Marcos has a question about using look-see versus full cam for abatement estimation.
Good question, Marcos. And Marcos, you don't have, Marcos, you don't have to be here. You've submitted a project, I know, so you know everything there is to know about it. Well, first thing is that full cam doesn't work for solid carbon. It only works for forest. So if you've got a solid carbon project, you don't have a choice. It's look-see. If it's a forest project, you have a choice. I'd go full cam because you're gonna need to do it anyway to give the proponent a better, a more precise idea of the financial, potential out of the project. So I'll go full cam because you're going to do it anyway. It's not that hard, and it's a lot more precise than look-see. So I'd say solid carbon look-see, forest project full cam.
All right. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Until
Otherwise,
tomorrow.
welcome back to your families. We'll see you at 7:45, not 6:30 tomorrow. So 7:45 till 9. It's only an hour and a quarter. Let's smash it out.
And thank you very much for your interest. See you tomorrow.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
See you guys.